Ladies and gentlemen, our guest today is Hector Spencer. Hector is a remarkable man. He is familiar in many ways with Mexico and the United States because he speaks both languages and has lived in both countries a great number of years. Hector lived south of the border in a polygamist cult. Hector, I would like you to share exactly how they maintained control over their people.
Becky, it's a pleasure to be in an interview with you. I know that you're doing a very interesting and wonderful work. So if there's anything that I can add to it, I hope that it will be a benefit to you and to all listeners. So like you explained, I originally was in the regular LDS Mormon church, but was convinced that it was no longer the true and only God's only true church, so that I did join a religious organization in Mexico that were the fundamentalist group called the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times. And during that time, of course, I had many interesting experiences, and the main thing that I would like to point out is that having actually been there, I have witnessed some of the things that go on in these fundamentalist groups that I didn't agree with. So naturally I wasn't in that group very long and left to better things and to go on to know that God is everybody's God.
You left?
Yes. I found that it's interesting to note how people are, let us say, convinced so easily to believe in things that are untrue merely because they become converted to the fact that a certain person is the prophet of the church and whatever he says is like the word of God to them. And so I found in this group, and of course in studying many other groups, that this is what regularly happens. If you're converted to what a certain person or prophet says, then you will follow whatever they have to say.
Well, the assumption is that if you believe in them, you will never question anything they say. You follow blindly. Is that what you're saying?
That's the point exactly. And I'm amazed that so many people are convinced that that is the case, and that it actually happens time and again in so many different groups. So as we've studied different groups and organizations, we see that this same thing happens.
People that want somebody else to be their intermediary between themselves and what is right, people that want to have a parent on earth or a God image on earth to tell them what to do, are in a precarious situation because they don't exercise any kind of critical thinking, do they?
That's right. See, they turn their lives over to somebody else and go completely on what these other people believe. And that is an incorrect doctrine. Now, one of the things that I have found is that many people that belong to these different groups are actually in cults. I have come to a conclusion that a cult is actually any group or sect or church that teaches people to practice and believe untrue or incorrect doctrines, while at the same time rendering devotion to a false god or a false prophet or person, or to an incorrect and even dangerous cause that they are devoted to. So I find that so many people that belong to these different organizations don't even realize that they are in a cult. That is my determination or belief that they are actually just one cult after another. In other words, if you leave one group to go into another, it's just like jumping out of one box into another. So that the message of life, or the principle that we find, is that people must learn to seek for real truths and try to get out of the box that they're in order not to be controlled by other people.
Well, don't you think it's significant of cults to create various forms of human rights violations and blame them on God, take away people's minds, their money, the control of their own bodies, their homes, their families, whatever they want to, and say it's in the name of God? And of course, that's irrational. That's the markings of a cult, right?
Yes, and so many things happen that way. I realized that in the experience that I had, when we join an organization, we completely turn our lives, our activities over to them, including the monetary part of life, our money that we donate to organizations, and not only that, but more importantly, our behavior and the things that we believe in and the things that we have to do in order to remain within those cults.
So the price of belonging to the cult is high because it's your service, your goods, your time, your dedication, and you don't realize it, but it's also the loss of yourself, because if you don't obey, you're kicked out. If you think for yourself, you're kicked out or in danger, right?
That's right. That's what we found. And so you have to obey the dictates, or let us say the different revelations that these different groups receive and pass on to their people, and people come to believe them as though they were actually coming from God Himself, even though later on we can realize that it was merely the work of inexperienced men that have put forth their beliefs instead of actually receiving the Word of God.
Don't you think that in a real cult, most of the guys at the top of the ladder, regardless of whether they were raised in it or not, have become artists at fleecing their sheep, and they know very well that they're not God? They're not surrogate gods, as they claim.
Well, and there's one thing that we think that many of these people that have these different organizations may be sincere in what they believe, but what they actually teach and believe is not true. But they have come to believe it, and they are very convincing to their people, or the people that are depending on them or following them. And so the people will do anything that these prophets or people that are leading them actually want them to do.
Well, I had a guy tell me that really there's nothing wrong or right, save thinking makes it so, which leaves the field wide open, because then you can say, as long as I can justify it, then it's going to be right. So all I got to do is figure up a fancy story to justify it, and then it's right. So that means if you're driving down the highway and the speed limit's 50 miles an hour, and you decide that you're going to go 110, and you crash into a semi-truck in front of you, I guess reality is going to come home to you with a crash, because the rest of the world's not flowing that way. The injustice and the ignorance of saying it's all right if I can justify it. How do you justify doing the wrong thing? How can you say that there's a right way to make people suffer and hurt them? Mm-hmm. It's illogical, but a cult does that, don't they?
Right. That's the point that we're trying to make, that once people believe that the leader or the prophet of that organization is speaking for God, they will actually ignore logic and other truths in order to follow the person that they think is giving them the Word of God.
Well, the thing that is so sad with these cults, the act of having more than one mate takes a man to the highest degree of glory and makes him a god. The same act takes a woman to the depths of hell and she'll be destroyed. The act of pedophilia is justified in the name of God with Warren Jeffs and so many of these cult leaders. And the mothers and the fathers that took their little girls and gave them to this man, knowing what was going to happen, were perpetrators of a crime. that they justified in the name of God. How did they get there?
That's it. It's too bad that this is what actually happens. But like I say, once that people are converted to the fact that the person that is leading them is the prophet and speaking for God, then they will do all of these unreasonable things just because they think that they're serving God, while at the same time that they are not doing what is right, and on the contrary, doing things that are harmful to other people, especially in the case of polygamy. In the case like you're mentioning, many of these people give away their little girls to men that they shouldn't have done so, just because they believe that the man is a prophet, but that he has received the word of God.
In the case of James Harmston had people sign over their entire ranches for a calling and election made sure ritual. And these people thought that they were literally buying their way into exaltation in heaven. How could they even believe that? That is so amazing.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I found out about people making their calling and election sure. We realize that this is a principle that is supposed to be a revelation from God Himself to a real prophet, to let him know that the person who is going to receive this blessing has been tested and tried and will not have and will not fail in their life, but will make their salvation true and exact, because the Lord knows them, and that's why they are given this blessing. But in many of these groups, the prophet just picks out somebody that they prefer or like and tell them, I'm going to give you your calling and election made sure.
And we'll test you by having you sign over all your property and worldly goods, and that's your test.
And that's the thing. So
and they accept that, and then find out they're on the street. Yeah. And James Harmston not only did that, but he excommunicated them after they questioned him about it.
That's what happens in a lot of these groups, that they give all that they have to the church and then find out that the church is not true. So when they leave, they have to leave without the shirt on their back, or with only the shirt on their back, let us say. And so these are some of the things that happen, and that unfortunately unfortunately do happen, and they should not happen. See?
According to the money trail in most fundamentalist polygamist cults that claim or blame Mormonism, most of them are really organized crime. And most of them, if the IRS were to get a hold of them, they'd be in serious trouble, because they have fleeced their sheep pretty bad. But their sheep won't tell, because then they'll get sent to hell.
That's the big problem involved with these groups. Once that they get converted to something, they will do anything that the prophet wants them to do. And eventually, if they come to their senses and realize that what they did was not right, then they end up with nothing. And that is a false principle, and the ones that should be punished are the prophets or the leaders that take advantage of these people and put a stop to some of these things.
It would be nice if they would hold them accountable. Unfortunately, most of them believe that they can blame somebody that happened 150 years ago or 2,000 years ago for their current behavior. And there is no justification for violations of human rights, no matter if anybody else did it before you or not. That's the dumbest justification in the world.
That's right. See, so many people believe that whatever was done in the past is like a precedent, so that it can be done again in their own time, and that it would be perfectly all right for them to do it. But we realize that the things that were done in the past were wrong, and if they do them in the present, they're still wrong.
Ross LeBaron claimed that the reason that he had children by his daughter was because it was biblical. I mean, the things that they can twist a pretzel into are amazing. Amazing. I don't care what happened. Biblically, they tell of every single crime humanity's ever committed. That doesn't make it okay. Writing something down in a book, good, bad, or ugly, is not a justification for human rights violations. And to believe that God ordained human rights violations is illogical.
That's right, see? And so there are many things in the Bible that you have to interpret correctly and know which ones are actually correct and which ones are not. So you have to use your wisdom and your judgment in all things. We realize that all of these books, both sacred books and other books, have many beautiful truths in them, but there are also other things that you cannot accept as truths.
Well, some of them are historical records of what happened, and people need to realize that they're there for the education of the history, not so that, well, this guy made a big mistake and it's in the Bible, so why don't you go out and make it?
That's right. You can't use anything that is incorrect to justify our acts in the present. So that's why you have to decide in this life which things are true and which are not true, and live by those things that are true.
There is a simple rule in the Bible, whether people can understand it or not, called the Golden Rule. This: treat other people like you'd be treated, like you would like to be treated. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. If we could just grow up enough to realize that that particular phrase is a truth, that we're all cells in the body of humanity, and if a group of cells rises up and starts to destroy other cells, we've got cancer.
That's right. I emphasize the point again that we should be truth seekers and try to find out in whatever we study or whatever we are told, that we should try to determine which parts are true and which parts are not true, and of course live by all things that are true. So always be a seeker after the truth.
If one steps into the psychological realm of just logic, if an action or a situation doesn't consider the greatest good for the greatest number, then it's on the wrong path. It's just that simple.
That's right.
It's not that complicated.
There's another saying that says that immorality is that which, if done by everyone, would destroy society. So these little things that some people try to justify themselves are immoral, and if done by everybody, it would destroy society. So the sooner we get rid of those things, the better it will be.
And that's why we have so much trouble, because we imagine that we're entitled to take from somebody else, to diminish somebody else, to hurt somebody else. There's no such entitlement. Religion, there's no justification for that. There isn't any entitlement for that. That's a lie.
That's right, see? We have to live by what is correct and true, and let the chips fall where they will, but be honest to yourself and to the things that are righteous and true.
Well, I know you're a learned man. I know you've studied many philosophies and theologies, and I know that you have walked away from the cult in Mexico, but you have carried your wisdom with you, and you have continued to learn, and you've been a very positive force for many people now, Hector, and I personally want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for letting me interview you.